Tonight, we're stepping into the shadows of a story that's as old as ancient mountains and as fresh as today's headlines. A tale of a simple leaf that became a powder, a promise, and ultimately, a plague. This is the complete history of cocaine, the white dust that toppled empires, fueled fortunes, and left a trail of shattered lives across the globe. Forget the glitzy movies and the quick highs. We're going deep into the real grit, the hidden truths that linger in the fog of time. So settle in, dim those lights, and let the weight of the day slip away as we unravel this mystery together. High up in the jagged peaks of the Andes, where the air is so thin it bites at your lungs, and the sun beats down like an unforgiving judge, a modest green shrub has thrived for thousands of years. Its leaves, chewed by weary travelers and revered priests, held a secret power, a gentle lift to push through the harsh world. But this wasn't just any plant. It was a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a whisper from the gods to those who toiled under endless skies. Fast forward through the centuries, and that same essence gets twisted, refined, and unleashed on an unsuspecting world. From the royal courts of ancient empires to the back alleys of modern cities, cocaine has worn many masks. A sacred gift, a medical miracle, a party favor for the elite, and now, in 2025, a deadly shadow laced with even darker poisons. As we embark on this journey, we'll trace its path from those misty highlands, where it sustained entire civilizations, through the cold labs of Europe, where curious minds unlocked its core. We'll watch as it bubbles up in fizzy drinks and tonics, promising energy and escape to a weary generation. Then comes the fall, the paranoia, the addictions, the laws that drove it underground and birthed monsters in the form of cartels. We'll meet the kingpins who built empires on blood and bribes, from the chaotic streets of Medellin to the calculated boardrooms of Cali, and see how the torch passed to the brutal syndicates just across the border. And we won't stop there. We'll follow the white lines snaking into Europe, hopping through forgotten coasts in Africa, and finally, circling back to today, where a synthetic killer hides in every gram, claiming lives in record numbers right here in 2025. This isn't just history. Reports from the United Nations this very year paint a grim picture. A surge in production, new routes carving through the globe, and overdose numbers climbing like never before. It's a reminder that the powder's grip hasn't loosened. If anything, it's tightened, blending with horrors like fentanyl to create a silent epidemic. What started as a leaf for survival has morphed into a force that reshapes societies, poisons rivers, and funds wars. But why does it endure? That's the real enigma we'll chase tonight, a story of human desire, greed, and the endless quest for that fleeting rush. Before we climb those ancient slopes, if this kind of deep dive into the unknown pulls you in like it does me, hit that like button to show some love, and subscribe to Mystery History for Sleep. I'm Mr. H, your guide through these twilight tales. Don't forget to ring the bell so you catch every new episode as soon as it drops. We'd love to have you along for more nights like this. Now, starting where the mystery began. For millennia, long before grand empires rose from the earth, or foreign ships scarred the seas, the people of South America held this leaf close. Archaeological whispers tell us it dates back at least 8,000 years, with traces of its magic found in the preserved hair of mummies along Peru's rugged coast. These weren't casual users. They were bound by ritual, burying their dead with pouches of dried leaves, a final offering to ease the journey beyond. The plant itself is humble, a shrub with glossy oval leaves and delicate white flowers that bloom into red berries. It thrives in the steamy, steep slopes of the Yungas, those eastern foothills where clouds hug the mountains like old friends. Ancient hands terraced the land, stacking stone walls that climbed skyward, carving out spaces to nurture their sacred crop. To the Inca, the mightiest of the Andean realms, this leaf was everything. They named it after a goddess, a feminine spirit bestowed by the sun god to comfort his people in their struggles. But it wasn't handed out freely. In their vast, tightly run empire, a web of stone roads and central commands, the leaf was a controlled treasure. Only the emperor, the nobles, the high priests, and select workers got their share. Priests would chew it during divinations, casting the leaves like tea leaves in a cup, reading patterns that shaped wars, alliances, and fates. Travelers carried rations for endurance, Laborers in the great public works, like raising the temples of Cusco or the hidden fortress of Machu Picchu, got daily doses to dull hunger and fight the altitude's cruel bite. It was fuel, pure and simple, powering the empire's heartbeat. And then, in the early 1500s, the conquerors arrived, their sails cutting the horizon like knives. Through their strict faith, they saw only devilry in the practice, branding it an obstacle to salvation. Decrees flew from distant councils, aiming to wipe out its growth and use. But greed, that eternal force, soon overruled piety. The invaders craved silver, and deep in the earth at a dizzying 13,000 feet, they unearthed a mountain of it, Potosi, a hell on high. To rip that wealth free, they twisted the old labor systems, herding thousands into suffocating tunnels where death came quick from cave-ins, poison fumes, or sheer burnout. They learned fast what the Inca knew. The leaf let men push past human limits, eating less, working harder, yielding more treasure for less cost. So the bands crumbled. Priests who once preached against it now owned fields of the stuff. What was once divine became a chain, greasing the wheels of empire and funneling Andean riches across oceans to fuel a golden age far away. This sets the stage for our descent into the deeper layers, a transformation from leaf to powder, from ritual to ruin. In the early 1500s, as the sun rose over the vast Pacific, strange ships appeared on the horizon, their sails billowing like ghosts from another world. These were the Spanish conquistadors, led by men like Francisco Pizarro, hungry for gold and glory. They crashed into the Inca Empire like a storm, toppling a civilization that had stood strong for centuries. At first, through the narrow view of their Catholic faith, they looked at the coca leaf, the very thing that had powered the Inca world, and saw nothing but sin. It was a pagan ritual, a devil's tool that kept the natives tied to their old gods and resistant to the cross. Priests fresh from Spain railed against it in fiery sermons, calling it an abomination that blocked the path to salvation. Decrees came down from distant councils in Lima, ordering the uprooting of fields and the punishment of anyone caught chewing the leaves. The goal was clear: erase the old ways, convert the souls, and build a new order under the Spanish crown. But empires aren't built on faith alone. The conquerors had come for wealth, and they found it buried deep in the earth, a mountain that seemed made of pure silver, rising up at a brutal 13,000 feet, where the air was so thin it clawed at your throat. Potosi, they called it, a name that would echo through history as both a treasure trove and a tomb. This wasn't just a mine, it was a gaping wound in the Andes, a hellish labyrinth of tunnels where darkness swallowed men whole. To feed this beast, the Spanish twisted the Inca's old labor system, the meter, into something far crueler. They rounded up tens of thousands of indigenous workers, forcing them down into the depths where collapses crushed bones, mercury vapors from refining the ore poisoned lungs, and exhaustion claimed lives by the score. It was a machine of extraction, churning out silver, that filled Spanish galleons and bankrolled wars and wonders back in Europe. Here's where the hypocrisy crept in, slow and pragmatic, like shadows lengthening at dusk. Those same priests and officials who had condemned the coca leaf as satanic soon realized its value not as a sacrament, but as a spark plug for their grinding operation. Without it, workers faltered too quickly, their bodies breaking under the strain. With it, they could push harder, eat less, ignore the altitude's dizzying grip. A small wad tucked in the cheek released a steady hum of energy, dulling hunger and sharpening focus just enough to keep the picks swinging and the carts rolling. The leaf became a ration, doled out like stale bread, turning what was once a divine privilege into a chain of survival. Overhead costs dropped, output soared, and the silver flowed like a river to Madrid. The church, ever adaptable when fortunes were at stake, quietly acquired plantations of their own. Fields that had once been tended with reverence now sprawled under overseers' whips, the harvest funneled straight to the mines. Imagine the scene. Dawn breaks cold and sharp over Potosi's barren slopes, the mountain looming like a silent giant. Lines of men, their faces etched with resignation, shuffle toward the black mouths of the tunnels. Each gets his measure of leaves, a handful pressed into calloused palms, enough to numb the ache, but not enough to dream of escape. Down they go, into air thick with dust and the metallic tang of ore, their chewing a rhythmic counterpoint to the hammer's clang. Hours stretch into eternities, bodies bending under loads that would crush the unfortified. Up top, overseers tally the haul, their ledgers filling with numbers that translate to palaces in Seville and cathedrals in Toledo. It's a brutal calculus. One leaf sustains one shift yields 1 bar of silver, and 1,000 bars build an empire. But at what price? Lives ground down to dust, families torn apart as men vanished into the earth, never to return. The Spanish had unlocked a secret, but it came with a hidden toll, a dependency that bound the colonized as surely as shackles. This wasn't mere exploitation. It was a system engineered for maximum yield, a preview of the industrial horrors to come. The coca leaf, stripped of its spiritual essence, became a commodity in the truest sense, traded and taxed to grease the wheels of colonial power. Plantations expanded across the yungas, terraced slopes buzzing with forced labor, the air heavy with the scent of green leaves drying under the sun. Indigenous communities, already reeling from conquest and disease, found their sacred plant weaponized against them. What had been a gift from the gods was now a tool of subjugation, doled out to keep the workforce compliant and productive. And the wealth? It poured out in staggering amounts, enough silver to flood Europe's markets, devalue currencies, and spark inflation that rippled across continents. Potosi alone produced more precious metal in those early years than all of Europe's mines combined, fueling the Spanish Golden Age, bankrolling armies in the Netherlands, and even touching the coffers of distant kings. Yet, beneath the gleam of that silver lay layers of suffering that history often buries. Think of the women left behind in villages, scraping by without husbands or sons, their rituals interrupted, their world upended, or the children born into this cycle, learning early that survival meant bending to the leaf's rhythm. The Spanish enforced quotas with ruthless efficiency, punishing shortfalls with floggings or worse. Resistance bubbled up in whispers, secret chewings in hidden groves, quiet rebellions that preserved fragments of the old ways. But the machine rolled on, inexorable, for 3 long centuries. The leaf stayed rooted in its Andean home, a local habit laced with sorrow, its deeper potential locked away like a seed waiting for fertile ground. Fast forward to our own time, and echoes of this control linger in chilling ways. Just this year, reports from think tanks in Washington highlight how modern cartels mirror those old tactics, using drug profits to fund insurgencies and terror groups across Latin America. It's the same playbook. Leverage a plant's power to dominate, extract, and destabilize. Organizations like the Center for Strategic and International Studies detail how cocaine money seeps into militant networks, buying weapons and influence in places where governments falter. The cost of control hasn't changed, it's still paid in human lives and fractured societies. Back then, it was silver mines. Now, it's jungle labs and border wars. The leaf's legacy persists, a thread connecting colonial greed to today's headlines. As the Spanish grip tightened, the coca leaf's story simmered in isolation, its true might dormant. But across the ocean, in the bustling labs of awakening Europe, curious hands were about to turn the key. What they unleashed would shatter the old boundaries, transforming a mountain secret into a global storm. But let's pause on that edge for a moment. The Andes had given up their treasure reluctantly, but the real unraveling was yet to come. In the quiet university towns of the 1800s, minds fueled by the Enlightenment's fire would dissect the leaf, pulling out its crystalline heart. They thought they were taming a wonder. Instead, they were birthing a beast. Let's shift our gaze now to the turbulent waves crashing against unfamiliar shores, where ambition met ancient worlds in a clash that echoed for generations. Imagine standing on the deck of a creaking galleon, salt spray stinging your face, as the outline of a new continent sharpens in the dawn light. It's 1532, and Francisco Pizarro, a hardened adventurer with eyes like flint, leads a band of just 168 men into the heart of the Inca realm. They weren't explorers in the romantic sense. They were raiders, driven by tales of gold that gleamed brighter than the sun. What they found was an empire vast and organized, stretching from modern-day Ecuador to Chile, a marvel of roads, aqueducts, and granaries that fed millions. But amid the awe, their attention snagged on something small and unassuming. Those green leaves the locals chewed with quiet reverence. Pizarro and his men watched as Inca runners dashed across mountain passes, their cheeks bulging with a quid of coca, delivering messages that knit the empire together. To the Spanish, fresh from the rigid doctrines of the Inquisition, this habit reeked of heresy. It was intertwined with sun worship and shamanic rites acts that mocked their god. Father Vicente de Valverde, the expedition's chaplain, thundered against it, declaring the leaf a conduit for demonic whispers that lured souls from Christ's light. In the chaotic aftermath of conquest, as Atahualpa, the last Inca emperor, was captured and executed despite a ransom of gold that filled rooms, the invaders set about dismantling the old order. Edicts from the newly founded city of Lima demanded the destruction of coca fields, the burning of sacred groves where the plant was honored as a goddess. Possession became a crime punishable by lashes, or worse, a tool to accelerate conversion and crush resistance. Yet, as the dust of battle settled and the Spanish began to inventory their prizes, a different reality dawned. The Andes weren't yielding their riches easily. The high altitudes sapped strength, the cold pierced like knives, and the work of empire building, constructing fortresses, churches, and administrative hubs demanded relentless labor from the subjugated people. Whispers spread among the encomenderos, the land grant holders who oversaw indigenous tribute, that the leaf wasn't just a vice, it was a necessity. Without it, workers wilted, their output halving. Curious minds among the colonists experimented, chewing a few leaves themselves during long marches, feeling that subtle surge that sharpened senses and warded off fatigue. What if, they pondered, this devil's herb could be turned to serve the crown? Enter the mountain that changed everything, a colossal peak in what is now Bolivia, discovered in 1545 by a local herder chasing a llama. Potosi rose like a sentinel, its veins pulsing with silver so pure it seemed forged by alchemy. The Spanish dubbed it Cerro Rico, the rich hill, and it became the engine of their New World dominance. But harvesting that bounty was a nightmare. At over 13,000 feet, where oxygen-starved lungs gasped for every breath, miners descended into labyrinthine shafts, armed with picks and prayers. The air down there was a toxic brew, dust that choked, fumes from crude lamps that burned eyes, and the constant threat of cave-ins that buried men alive. To meet the quotas set by Madrid, which hungered for silver to fund wars against the Ottomans and Protestants, the viceroys revived and warped the Inca meter system. Entire villages were conscripted. Men aged 18 to 50 marched hundreds of miles to serve terms in the mines, leaving families to fend in famine-prone highlands. Here's where the leaf's fate twisted in ways no one could have foreseen. Early bans faltered as reports trickled back. Without coca, productivity plummeted. Workers collapsed from Soroshi altitude sickness that hammered heads and twisted guts. A chew of the leaves, mixed with a pinch of lime to unlock its alkaloids, provided a buffer, a chemical shield that let bodies endure the unendurable. Governors, eyeing their tribute tallies, began to advocate for its use. By the mid-1600s, coca had morphed from forbidden fruit to essential supply. Royal decrees shifted, allowing controlled cultivation, with plantations sprouting under Spanish oversight. Indigenous farmers, once free to grow for their communities, now toiled under quotas, their harvests taxed and funneled to the mines. It was a perverse economy. Leaves exchanged for labor, labor for silver, silver for power. Delve deeper into a day in this grim symphony. A miner awakens in a cramped hut on Potosi's slopes, the city around him a chaotic boomtown of 40,000 souls by 1600, larger than Madrid itself. He joins the queue at the distribution point, where overseers hand out rations. A handful of dried coca leaves, perhaps 2 ounces, enough for the shift. Chewing as he descends, the bitterness floods his mouth, but soon comes the clarity, a muted euphoria that mutes the pain in his joints from yesterday's haul. Down in the depths, he hammers at seams of ore, the leaf suppressing his appetite so he skips the meager midday meal, saving costs for his masters. Mercury amalgamation, the process to purify silver, releases vapors that rot teeth in cloud mines, but the coca helps him push through, hour after hour. Emerge at dusk, and he's one of the lucky ones. Thousands perished annually, their bodies hauled out like spent ore. This system didn't just extract metal, it extracted souls. The church, initially the loudest critic, pivoted with stunning speed. Bishops acquired haciendas in the Yungas valleys, where warm, humid climes nurtured the best coca. Slaves from Africa, imported to supplement the dwindling indigenous workforce ravaged by smallpox and overwork, joined the cycle, their labor fueling fields that in turn fueled mines. The irony burned, priests preaching purity while profiting from the very idolatry they decried. Revenues from coca taxes swelled colonial coffers, funding ornate cathedrals that loomed over plazas where public floggings reminded all of the new order. And the silver? It cascaded across the Atlantic in annual fleets, guarded by warships against pirates, transforming Spain into Europe's banker. Artisans in Seville crafted masterpieces. Kings in Versailles envied the wealth, but few pondered the human fuel behind it. Consider the curanderos, the indigenous healers who clung to coca's spiritual role in secret ceremonies, blending it with Catholic saints to preserve their heritage. Or the women in the markets of Cusco, selling bundles under the noses of authorities, their trade a quiet act of defiance. These threads of resistance wove through the oppression, hinting at a resilience that would outlast empires. But the toll mounted. Populations plummeted from 8 million in the Andes at conquest to barely 1 million by 1650, a genocide fueled by disease, war, and unrelenting toil. Coca, once a bridge to the divine, now bridged the gap between life and death, keeping workers alive just long enough to be useful. Modern reports from organizations like the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime reveal how today's coca fields in Colombia and Peru echo those colonial plantations, poor farmers trapped in cycles of debt to cartels, their crops sprayed with herbicides in endless eradication campaigns that poison soil and water. The Washington Center for Strategic Studies notes how drug profits still fund shadow economies, much like Spanish silver bankrolled conquests. It's as if the leaf carries a curse, repeating patterns of exploitation across eras. As the 17th century waned, the leaf lingered in its Andean cradle, its power contained like a coiled spring. But across the seas, in the flickering candlelight of European laboratories, a new chapter beckoned. Scientists, armed with microscopes and curiosity, would probe its secrets, unleashing a force that no ban could contain. What mysteries awaited in those crystalline extracts? The answer would redefine the world, turning a colonial tool into a global temptation. The 19th century arrived in Europe like a fever dream, minds racing with the thrill of discovery, dissecting every corner of the natural world for its hidden codes. In smoky university halls and cluttered apothecaries, chemists chased alkaloids, those nitrogen-rich compounds that promised to unlock the body's secrets. They had already tamed morphine from the opium poppy, quinine from cinchona bark to battle malaria, and caffeine from coffee beans to jolt the weary. Dried bales of coca leaves, trickling in from South American ports as curiosities or failed tonics, sat on shelves gathering dust, their potential whispering to anyone bold enough to listen. What if this unassuming foliage held the next breakthrough, a spark to ignite the age of science? Enter a quiet corner of Germany in 1855, where a chemist named Friedrich Geidke, working in a modest lab in Rostock, decided to pry open the leaf's defenses. He steeped the dried greens in alcohol, filtered, evaporated, and coaxed out a yellowish, oily residue, crude but alive with promise. He dubbed it erythroxylin, after the plant's genus Erythroxylum, and published his findings in a journal that barely caused a ripple. The extract was impure, inconsistent, more novelty than revolution. But seeds were planted. Across the continent, eyes turned to the Andes gift, shipments increasing as botanists classified and merchants speculated. The leaf was no longer just a colonial footnote. It was raw material for the Enlightenment's grand experiment. 5 years later, in the serene university town of Göttingen, a young graduate student named Albert Niemann took the baton. Under the watchful eye of his mentor, the renowned Friedrich Wöhler, who had once synthesized urea and shattered the barrier between organic and inorganic worlds, Niemann refined the hunt. His lab was a symphony of glassware, beakers bubbling over spirit lamps, distillations dripping like slow rain. He dissolved the leaves in solvents, washed with acids and bases, precipitated and recrystallized until, one fateful day in 1860, he held in his palm a pure, white, crystalline powder. Bitter to the taste, It numbed the tongue on contact, a deadening sensation that sent a shiver of excitement through him. In his dissertation, he described it meticulously, naming it cocaine, blending coca with the alkaloid suffix -ine. It was elegant, potent, a molecule stripped bare of the leaf's bulk. Neiman had forged the key, but the door it opened remained ajar, its contents glimpsed but not yet grasped. Word spread slowly through academic circles, footnotes in journals, demonstrations at scientific societies. Physicians tested small doses on patients, noting the quickened pulse, the dilated pupils, the burst of mental clarity. But cocaine languished, a curiosity without a champion, until a young Viennese neurologist named Sigmund Freud entered the scene in 1884. Freud was ambitious, restless, scraping by on meager research grants, hungry for a discovery that would catapult him to fame. Reports of coca's effects reached him through military dispatches, German soldiers in maneuvers chewing leaves for endurance, South American miners pushing limits. Intrigued, he ordered a sample from the Merck company in Darmstadt, which had begun producing the pure alkaloid in small quantities. Freud's first encounter was personal, almost intimate. He dissolved a pinch in water, swallowed it, and waited. What followed was euphoria, a wave of exhilaration that banished fatigue and sharpened his thoughts to a razor's edge. In his seminal paper Über Coca, published that same year, he raved about it as a miracle, a cure for melancholy, a stimulant without hangover or harm. He experimented relentlessly, on himself, his sisters, his fiancée Martha Bernays, prescribing it to build strength and rosy cheeks. Most audaciously, he touted it as an antidote to morphine addiction, a common scourge among Civil War veterans and the opium-dosed elite. Freud envisioned cocaine reshaping medicine, a tool to conquer exhaustion, depression, even hay fever. His enthusiasm ignited a spark. Colleagues flocked to try it. Journals buzzed with case studies. One such follower, ophthalmologist Karl Koller, a friend from Vienna's medical circles, latched onto Neimann's old note about the numbing effect. In a series of bold experiments, Koller dissolved cocaine in solution and dropped it into the eyes of frogs, then dogs, watching pain vanish without clouding vision. The breakthrough came in a Vienna hospital theatre. A patient with a corneal ulcer, fully awake, endured surgery without flinching as Koller incised and stitched. The audience of surgeons gasped. This was local anesthesia, a revolution. No more ether's risks or chloroform's dangers. Precise work on eyes, teeth, throats became possible, while patients chatted calmly. The medical world exploded. Cocaine flooded clinics, hypodermic kits sold with vials of the hydrochloride salt. Dentists hailed it for painless extractions, surgeons for delicate operations. Parker Davis in America ramped up production, marketing it in powders, solutions, even cigarettes for asthma. Freud's star rose, but cracks appeared. His patient Ernst von Fleischl-Marxow, a brilliant physiologist hooked on morphine after an amputation, received cocaine injections to wean him. At first, relief, then horror. Fleischl spiraled into psychosis, tormented by hallucinations of white snakes slithering under his skin, his mind fracturing under the drug's whip. He died ravaged. A caution, Freud buried in silence, rarely mentioning cocaine again. Yet the genie was out. Entrepreneurs sniffed opportunity. In Paris, Angelo Mariani, a Corsican with a knack for hype, had already been steeping coca leaves in Bordeaux wine since 1863, creating Vin Mariani, a tonic endorsed by popes and presidents. But pure cocaine amplified the frenzy. Merck's output soared from grams to kilograms. The powder infiltrated every corner. Throat lozenges for singers, drops for teething babies, elixirs for the neurasthenic middle class battling industrial life's grind. Neiman died young in 1861. His work overshadowed. Geidke faded into obscurity. But their legacy? A molecule that danced on the edge of salvation and damnation. In America, pharmacists like John Stith Pemberton, wrestling his own morphine demons from war wounds, brewed a French wine coca, inspired by Mariani. Prohibition in Atlanta forced a switch to syrup and soda, birthing Coca-Cola, its early glasses laced with 9 milligrams of cocaine per serving, a brain tonic for headaches and nerves. By the 1890s, cocaine was ubiquitous, a Victorian wonder drug, Advertisements promised vitality. Magazines touted testimonials. But whispers of trouble grew. Users chasing the high, crashing into paranoia. Doctors noting the cocaine bug's illusion. Freud's utopia cracked, but the powder marched on, embedding in culture. As the century closed, commerce seized the reins, turning science's child into a marketplace marvel. What brews when medicine meets money? A tonic for the ages, or a poison in disguise? Picture a bustling Paris street in the 1860s, gas lamps flickering against the dusk, horse-drawn carriages clattering over cobblestones. And in the midst of it all, a shrewd Corsican named Angelo Mariani, pacing his workshop like a conductor before the orchestra. He wasn't a scientist or a doctor. He was a marketer, with a nose for what the world craved: vitality in a bottle, escape from the grind of a city exploding with factories and fashions. Mariani had been importing tons of prime Peruvian coca leaves, those bright green ovals that still carried the faint scent of Andean mist. His eureka moment came one evening as he steeped them in fine Bordeaux wine, watching the alcohol pull out the essence like a gentle tide. What emerged was a deep red elixir, smooth on the tongue with a subtle kick that lifted the spirits without the slump of plain booze. He bottled it, slapped on a label proclaiming Vin Mariani, and unleashed it on a public desperate for a pick-me-up. The tonic took off like wildfire in a dry forest. Mariani was a genius at the game, soliciting endorsements from anyone with a name. Pope Leo XIII sipped it daily, even awarding Mariani a Vatican gold medal for services to humanity. Queen Victoria kept cases in Buckingham Palace, crediting it for her endurance through endless state duties. Thomas Edison, burning the midnight oil in his Menlo Park lab, swore it fueled his inventions. Ulysses S. Grant, battling throat cancer while penning his memoirs, found solace in its warmth. Writers like Émile Zola and Jules Verne penned glowing reviews, calling it the muse for their masterpieces. Advertisements blanketed newspapers and billboards. Elegant ladies with renewed vigor, weary businessmen transformed into titans. One glass, and fatigue melted away. Depression lifted like morning fog. Mariani's factory in Neuilly-sur-Seine churned out millions of bottles, a global supply chain stretching from Yungas plantations to Parisian cellars, then shipped to eager markets worldwide. Across the Atlantic, in the humid heat of Atlanta, Georgia, a pharmacist named John Stith Pemberton watched this European sensation with hungry eyes. A Confederate veteran scarred by war, Pemberton carried his own burden, an addiction to morphine from battlefield wounds that left him in constant pain. He tinkered in his lab, seeking a cure for himself and a fortune for his family. Inspired by Mariani's success, he crafted Pemberton's French wine coca in 1885, a near clone, coca leaves macerated in wine, spiked with cola nut for extra caffeine, flavored with oils of orange and cinnamon. It sold briskly at soda fountains, 5 cents a glass, promising to soothe nerves, cure headaches, and banish the blues. Customers lined up, glasses fizzing with that mysterious lift. But fate, in the form of local temperance laws, threw a curveball. Fulton County went dry in 1886, banning alcohol sales. Pemberton, undeterred, scrambled to adapt. He ditched the wine, blended the coca and cola extracts into a sugary syrup, added carbonated water, and voila, Coca-Cola was born. The name stuck, evoking the 2 key ingredients, and the drink hit Jacob's pharmacy counters as a non-alcoholic intellectual beverage. Early recipes packed about 9 milligrams of cocaine per glass, enough for a noticeable buzz without overwhelming. Ads touted it as a brain tonic, ideal for ladies suffering hysteria or gentlemen battling exhaustion. Sales boomed. By 1888, Pemberton sold the formula to Asa Candler, a savvy businessman who scaled it up, bottling the syrup for fountains nationwide. The frenzy wasn't limited to drinks. Pharmaceutical giants jumped in. Parker Davis in Detroit marketed cocaine in every form imaginable. Pure crystals for doctors, solutions for injections, even a Coca-Cola rival called Coca-Cal. Throat lozenges infused with the powder soothed singers and orators. Toothache drops numbed gums for kids. Mail-order catalogs offered hypodermic kits complete with cocaine vials, promising instant relief. The drug was everywhere. Over the counter, no prescription needed. Middle-class homes stocked it like aspirin, mothers dosing children for colds, athletes for stamina. It embodied the era's optimism: science, conquering nature, progress in a pinch. Mariani's empire peaked with testimonials from Arctic explorers and opera divas. He published albums of celebrity praise, turning users into walking ads. In America, Coca-Cola evolved, Candler buying out partners and pushing the brand with coupons and slogans like "Drink Coca-Cola delicious and refreshing." By the 1890s, it was a household name. The cocaine subtly downplayed, but still the hook. Pemberton died poor in 1888, his invention slipping from his grasp, but his legacy fizzed on. What drove this madness? The Belle Epoque's frantic pace trains, telegraphs, electric lights demanding constant energy. Cocaine fit perfectly, a quick fix for the modern soul. But cracks formed. Users chased higher doses. Crashes hit harder. Doctors noted tolerance, the need for more to feel the same. Mariani himself warned of excess, but profits spoke louder. In 2025, the echo lingers in energy drinks and wellness tonics, chasing that ancient lift. But the original frenzy? A bubble waiting to burst, commerce's sweet illusion masking the storm ahead. As medicine claimed the powder next, wonders turned to warnings: what price for paradise in a bottle? The powder had slipped from the hands of merchants and landed squarely in the laps of white-coated healers, who greeted it like a long-lost prodigy. By the mid-1880s, cocaine was no longer a parlor trick or a fizzy secret. It was the scalpel's new best friend. Doctors who once relied on crude ether knocks or chloroform drips now held a tool that let them work with precision, while the patient blinked and chatted. The shift felt like stepping from candlelight into electric glare, sudden, dazzling, and a little terrifying. Carl Koller, a 26-year-old ophthalmologist with ink-stained fingers and a perpetual squint, became the unwitting herald. In Vienna's General Hospital, he dripped a dilute cocaine solution onto a glaucoma patient's cornea. The man's eye went numb in seconds, no twitch, no tear, no scream when the knife slid in. Koller repeated the stunt on himself, pressing a needle to his own eyeball just to be sure. The audience of surgeons leaned forward as one organism, breath held. When the patient sat up afterward and asked for coffee, the room erupted. Word rocketed through medical journals. Local anesthesia had arrived, and cocaine was its crown jewel. Within months, operating theaters buzzed with new rituals. A dentist in Buffalo yanked molars while the patient read the newspaper. Throat specialists in London snipped tonsils to the rhythm of casual conversation. Even battlefield surgeons, haunted by gangrene and screams, packed cocaine kits alongside morphine. The drug didn't knock you out. It simply erased the pain in one patch of flesh, leaving the mind sharp. For the first time, delicacy trumped speed. A cataract could be teased out like a pearl from an oyster. A shattered nose rebuilt stitch by meticulous stitch. The enthusiasm spilled beyond surgery. Neurologists prescribed it for nerve exhaustion, that catch-all curse of the overworked elite. Hysterical women diagnosed with everything from womb wanderings to vaporous moods swallowed cocaine tablets and declared themselves reborn. Asylum doctors injected it to quiet manic episodes, watching wild eyes soften into eerie calm. Pediatricians, bless their optimistic hearts, sprinkled cocaine drops on teething gums, convinced the numbness outweighed any risk. Parker Davis sold cocaine for children in pretty blue bottles, complete with dosage charts scaled by age. Sigmund Freud, still riding the high of his 1884 paper, became the drug's loudest evangelist. He mailed samples to colleagues like party favors, urging them to try it on melancholics, alcoholics, even the lovesick. His private letters brim with giddy reports. Martha's cheeks are rosier than ever. He treated a morphine-addicted friend, Ernst von Fleischl-Marxow, with escalating injections, convinced he was pioneering substitution therapy. At first, Fleischl rallied, pain gone, intellect sparkling. Freud crowed to the world. Then the letters turned frantic. Fleischl saw white snakes under his skin, felt bugs burrowing into his spine. He begged for more cocaine to chase the horrors away, spiraling into a psychosis so vivid he clawed at his own flesh. Freud watched his miracle curdle into nightmare, yet kept the full story buried, mentioning it only in hushed asides years later. The medical press, meanwhile, overflowed with triumph. Case reports stacked like kindling. A sailor's crushed hand rebuilt without a whimper. A singer's vocal cords operated on mid-aria. Cocaine kits became status symbols, polished mahogany cases with crystal vials. gold-plated syringes, engraved nameplates. Wealthy patients demanded cocaine cures at Swiss spas, lounging in alpine air while nurses administered measured doses. The drug promised not just relief but enhancement, sharper wits, boundless energy, a chemical shortcut to human potential. Yet beneath the applause, quieter voices murmured. A Philadelphia physician noted patients returning sooner, asking for stronger solutions. A Berlin dentist reported a singer who couldn't perform without her throat candy, her voice cracking when denied. Tolerance crept in like fog, first a whisper, then a roar. Users chased the initial magic, upping doses until euphoria flipped into agitation. Hearts racing, sleep vanishing. The cocaine bug's phenomenon spread, an itch that wasn't there, a crawl under the skin that drove men to scratch until they bled. Autopsies revealed shriveled noses, perforated septums, hearts scarred by frantic rhythms. Still, the miracle held. In 1887, William Stewart Halstead, the brilliant surgeon who would later pioneer modern techniques, began injecting cocaine to stay awake during marathon operations. His hands, once steady as marble, started to tremble. He vanished for months, resurfacing gaunt and secretive, his addiction a closely guarded rumor. Halstead eventually switched to morphine, but the damage lingered. He operated with a tremor for life, masking it with flawless skill. By the 1890s, cocaine had infiltrated every specialty. Gynecologists numbed cervixes for examinations, proctologists eased hemorrhoid surgeries, even veterinarians used it on racehorses. The Lancet and the Journal of the American Medical Association ran dueling editorials, one side hailing the greatest boon since ether, the other warning of cocaine mania. Merck's annual report boasted production in the hundreds of kilograms, shipped in wooden crates, stamped with triumphant eagles. Curiosity pulls us to the fringes, where the drug's darker experiments unfolded. In asylums, doctors tested it on the feeble-minded, hoping to spark dormant intellects. In prisons, wardens slipped it into bread to pacify riotous inmates. A Chicago physician claimed it cured homosexuality, prescribing weekly injections until the patient regained manly vigor. Quacks peddled cocaine-lined corsets for female complaints, cocaine hair tonics for baldness, even cocaine suppositories for constipation. The line between medicine and carnival blurred. Modern analogues, synthetic anesthetics descended from cocaine, save lives daily, but the original's reckless romance lingers in every fentanyl-laced gram. The miracle was real. The illusion was thinking we could control it. As the century turned, the wonder drug's shine began to dull. Whispers grew to shouts, and the same hands that had applauded now reached for restraint. What happens when paradise reveals its price? The fall was coming, swift and unforgiving. The first cracks appeared not in thunderous scandals but in the quiet corners of doctors' offices, where patients returned with eyes too wide and stories too frantic. By the late 1890s, the miracle had started to stutter. A Boston physician jotted in his ledger, "Mrs. H. begs for another vial, says the world grays without it." A London surgeon noticed his assistant's hands shaking during rounds, pupils pinned despite the gaslight. What began as a whisper of more grew into a chorus of desperation. The same powder that once promised clarity now delivered a carousel of torment. Hearts pounding like war drums, sleep fleeing like a thief, thoughts fracturing into paranoid shards. The medical journals, once overflowing with praise, began printing cautions in fine print. A German toxicologist dissected a cadaver and found a heart scarred like old leather, valves fluttering from chronic overstimulation. In Paris, a neurologist catalogued cocaine psychosis, patients convinced invisible insects tunneled beneath their skin, scratching until blood streaked the walls. The phrase cocaine bugs entered the lexicon, a shorthand for an itch that lived only in the mind. Dentists reported noses collapsing inward, septums dissolving like sugar in rain. The drug's numbing gift had become a cruel joke. It deadened flesh but awakened nightmares. Sigmund Freud, the former champion, watched the tide turn from his Vienna study. His friend, Fleischl Marxow's death, in 1891, lingered like a stain he couldn't scrub away. Freud stopped prescribing, stopped writing about it, but the damage echoed. His own brief experiments left him with a lingering unease. He later confessed in letters that cocaine had robbed him of years. Yet the silence from such a prominent voice spoke louder than any warning. Across the Atlantic, the panic took on an uglier hue. In the American South, where racial tensions simmered like gumbo on a slow boil, cocaine became a scapegoat, wrapped in fear. Newspapers printed lurid tales of cocaine-crazed Negroes rampaging through towns, impervious to bullets, eyes glowing with superhuman rage. A 1914 New York Times piece by Dr. Edward Williams claimed the drug turned black men into marksmen who laughed at .32 caliber rounds. Southern sheriffs, clutching these headlines like gospel, swapped revolvers for .38 specials, citing the need for stopping power against the fiends. None of it was true. Studies later showed cocaine didn't grant bulletproof skin, but truth was beside the point. The myth served a purpose: justify lynchings, curfews, and chain gangs under the banner of public safety. The press fanned the flames. The Literary Digest ran cartoons of wild-eyed black figures brandishing knives, pupils dilated to saucers. In Atlanta, the Journal warned that one sniff turns a docile field hand into a demon. White middle-class users, bankers snorting lines in boardrooms, society ladies dabbing gums before bridge escaped the caricature. Their habit was a nervous complaint. The black users was a societal threat. Cocaine became the perfect villain, invisible, insidious, and conveniently tied to the other. Politicians smelled votes in the hysteria. Reformers like Hamilton Wright, America's first opium commissioner, lobbied Congress with stacks of clippings. "Cocaine is the most dangerous drug known to man," he thundered, ignoring alcohol's body count. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 was the first salvo, a modest law requiring labels on patent medicines. Suddenly, soothing syrups for babies revealed opium. Headache powders confessed cocaine. Housewives gasped at the fine print on their tonics. Sales of Coca-Cola plummeted overnight. Asa Candler, ever the pragmatist, quietly removed the active alkaloid in 1903, switching to spent leaves for flavor alone. The fizz remained, but the buzz vanished. Labeling wasn't enough for the growing chorus. Temperance leagues, muckrakers, and racial purity advocates demanded blood. Ida Tarbell's exposés in McClure's magazine painted pharmacies as dens of vice. Diplomatic pressure mounted. America wanted to lecture China on opium. To do so credibly, it needed clean hands at home. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914 looked innocent on paper, a revenue measure requiring doctors and pharmacists to register and pay a stamp tax for dispensing cocaine or opiates. But Treasury agents enforced it like a prohibition. Prescribing to maintain an addict's habit? Not legitimate medical practice. Clinics that treated addiction as illness were raided. Doctors handcuffed in front of patients. The fallout was swift and brutal. Legal supply dried up overnight. A substance once bought like candy now required federal paperwork. Users, former patients, veterans, society matrons found themselves criminals. The pharmacy door slammed shut. The alley door creaked open. Black market dealers emerged from the shadows, cutting the pure powder with chalk, borax, even arsenic. Prices soared. Purity plunged. Overdoses spiked as users guessed at potency. In the South, the law became a cudgel. Black neighborhoods faced dawn raids. White suburbs got warnings. Arrests for possession filled jails, feeding the convict lease system that replaced slavery. A $5 rock could mean 5 years breaking rocks. The racial mythology hardened into policy. Europe followed suit. Britain's Dangerous Drugs Act of 1920 restricted cocaine to medical channels. Germany, reeling from war, banned non-prescription sales. The League of Nations convened conferences, drafting treaties that bound nations to control the white drugs. By the 1920s, cocaine had been banished from polite society. The soda fountain's cheerful clang gave way to the speakeasy's muffled jazz. The powder didn't disappear, it went underground, reinventing itself as forbidden fruit for flappers and financiers. But the genie was out, and the bottle had shattered. The Harrison Act's ghost still walks the halls of justice. Mandatory minimums, racial disparities in sentencing, the war on drugs, machinery, all trace roots to that 1914 tax stamp. Overdose reports from the DEA this year show cocaine deaths surging again, often laced with fentanyl, a synthetic echo of the old panic. The darkness that revealed itself a century ago never fully retreated. It simply changed masks. The fall was complete. But Prohibition rarely kills desire. It raises the stakes and curates the clientele. As the legal world turned its back, a shadow economy bloomed, ready to supply the daring, the desperate, and the damned. What secrets would the underground keep? The roaring 20s were about to find out. The 20s roared in like a midnight train, all brass horns and bootleg gin, and cocaine slipped through the cracks of Prohibition like smoke under a speakeasy door. What the Harrison Act had outlawed in daylight now glittered in the half-light of hidden rooms, a whispered password away from the law. It wasn't the medicine of grandmothers anymore. It was the secret handshake of the fast crowd, the silver spoon tucked in a flapper's garter, the discreet vial passed across a marble bar in Harlem. The powder had gone from pharmacy shelf to status symbol, low volume, high margin, and portable as a pocket watch. In a decade drunk on rebellion, cocaine was the perfect accessory, illegal, expensive, and outrageously alive. Start in New York, where the skyline clawed higher every month, and the streets pulsed with jazz spilling from rent party basements. A young trumpet player named Louis Armstrong might duck into a brownstone after a gig, the air thick with cigarette haze and the sweet tang of reefer. Someone produces a small glassine envelope, folds it open like a magician revealing a dove. A bump on the thumbnail, a quick sniff, and the room sharpens, notes fly cleaner, laughter rings louder, the night stretches elastic. Down in the village, poets like Edna Street, Vincent Millay chase verses until dawn, the powder peeling away exhaustion so the words keep tumbling. It's not addiction in their minds, it's inspiration, a chemical muse for the avant-garde. Cross town to the marble lobbies of Wall Street, where ticker tape snows the sidewalks and fortunes flip faster than cards. Brokers in pinstripes huddle in washrooms, chopping lines on cigarette cases, stealing nerves for another round of margin calls. The crash is still a rumor in 1925, but the high is real. Cocaine keeps the adrenaline pumping, the bets bolder. One financier, flush from a railroad merger, hosts weekend parties in a Long Island mansion, the powder served on silver trays beside caviar. Guests arrive in Duesenbergs, leave at sunrise in a haze of confidence. It's the drug of winners, the ones who believe the market only climbs. Hollywood catches the fever next, a sun-baked factory churning dreams on celluloid. Silent stars like Rudolph Valentino and Clara Bow work brutal schedules, 14-hour days under Klieg lights that blister skin. A quick dab in the dressing room, and the camera loves them again. Eyes brighter, smiles electric. Directors whisper about girl or nose candy, code for the white lifeline that keeps the reel spinning. Wallace Reed, the golden boy with the million-dollar grin, starts after a train wreck injury on set. Morphine first, then cocaine to counter the fog. By 1923, he's gaunt, paranoid, checking into sanitariums under aliases. His death at 31 rips the curtain back just enough for gossip columns to hiss, but the studios hush it fast. The Hayes office drafts morality clauses, yet the powder flows deeper underground, passed in powder rooms at pickfair parties, hidden in cigarette cases on yacht decks. The supply lines are elegant in their simplicity. No vast fleets yet, just opportunists with suitcases and nerve. Pharmaceutical leftovers from Europe divert through Havana or Montreal, smuggled in false-bottom trunks or sewn into coat linings. Arnold Rothstein, the dapper gambler who allegedly fixed the 1919 World Series, sees the math. A kilo costs pennies in Peru, sells for thousands in Manhattan. He finances mules, pretty chorus girls on ocean liners, stewards on Pullman cars who carry grams taped to thighs or swallowed in condoms. Risky, but the markup is obscene. Rothstein's network is discreet, almost corporate. Ledgers in code, payoffs to customs agents, delivery boys in chauffeured Packards. South of the border, the trade's cradle shifts. Chile had been the quiet hub in the 1960s. Valparaiso docks unloading crates marked coffee, basements in Santiago refining paste into crystal. A restaurateur known only as the Godmother runs it like a family business. Her eatery, a front for labs where workers stomp paste in kerosene pits. But Pinochet's 1973 coup cracks down hard. Traffickers scatter like roaches under a boot. The vacuum pulls north to Colombia, where ambitious young men in Medellin watch and learn. They start small cigarette runs, car theft, but the white gold calls louder. Paris after the war is another playground. Expatriates like Hemingway and Picasso haunt left-bank cafes, the powder cutting through absinthe fog. Surrealists claim it unlocks the subconscious. Jagged visions for canvases. In Berlin's cabarets, Marlene Dietrich's legs flash under sequins, while backstage vials circulate. The drug is cosmopolitan, borderless, a passport to the in-crowd. Yet the glamour masks rot. A starlet overdoses in a Beverly Hills bathtub, wrists slashed in despair. A jazz musician pawns his sax for another gram, fingers too shaky to play. Rothstein himself ends in a Park Central hotel shooting in 1928. Debts and double crosses catching up. The powder promises brilliance but delivers compulsion. The high, a steep cliff with a brutal drop. The speakeasy vibe lives in VIP lounges and festival porta potties. The same discreet bump before the drop. UN reports this year clock record seizures, but the allure endures luxury wrapped in risk. The 20s taught us, forbid something, and it becomes irresistible. As the decade burned out, the quiet smugglers of Chile gave way to something monstrous. Colombia's new breed didn't just move product, they industrialized it, building empires on assembly lines of terror. What happens when crime goes corporate? The machine was about to rev up. The jungle swallowed the sound of engines long before the planes ever touched down. Deep in Colombia's emerald folds, where the Andes spilled into the Amazon basin, a new kind of factory hummed not with steel presses or conveyor belts, but with the hiss of acetone evaporating from plastic drums and the rhythmic stomp of bare feet mashing coca leaves into a greenish sludge. This wasn't a workshop, it was a cathedral of chemistry, and the high priests wore jeans and carried AK-47 seconds. By the late 1970s, the old Chilean roots had collapsed under Pinochet's boot, and the vacuum sucked ambition northward. Medellin, a city of steep hills and coffee barons, birthed a generation of men who saw cocaine not as contraband, but as destiny. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria started small, the way legends always do. A stocky kid from the dusty suburb of Envigado, he boosted tombstones from cemeteries and resold them polished clean. Cars followed, then cigarettes smuggled in truck tires. Kidnappings paid the tuition for bigger dreams. Escobar wasn't tall, wasn't educated at fancy universities, but he had a predator's instinct for leverage. He watched the paste labs in Peru and Bolivia, crude pits, where campesinos danced in gasoline to extract base, and thought, why ship the mess when you can refine it here and sell the finished crystal? Vertical integration, they'd call it in boardrooms. Escobar called it common sense. He partnered with men who complemented his edges. The Ochoa brothers, Jorge Luis, Juan David, Fabio, came from horse-breeding money, old Paisa stock with manners and ledgers. They handled the books, the bribes, the polite smiles for politicians. Carlos Leda, a wiry German Colombian with a Hitler mustache and a Lenin obsession, brought vision, an island. Norman's Cay in the Bahamas, a speck of sand and runway bought cheap from a broke developer. Leda turned it into a narco port, radar towers, refrigerated hangars, a disco for pilots. Planes loaded in Colombia lifted off at dusk, dropped waterproof bales over the Caribbean, or landed bold as brass on the Strip. From there, speedboats screamed to Florida's coast, offloading into shrimp boats or hidden coves. The math was intoxicating. A kilo of paste cost $200 in the Putumayo. Refined, it fetched $30,000 in Miami. But Escobar didn't want to be a middleman. He wanted the whole chain. He financed coca growers in Peru, sent chemists to Bolivia, built labs the size of small towns. Tranquilandia, hidden in the Yari River basin, was the crown jewel. 50 labs under camouflage netting, dorms for 200 workers, generators growling day and night. Chemists, some poached from legit pharma firms, tweaked recipes, boosting purity to 90%. Output hit 10 tons a week. Tons. The air reeked of ether and ambition. Logistics became art. Submarines, crude diesel hulks welded in jungle yards carried 2 tons submerged, snorting along the seabed like metal whales. Planes with belly tanks flew low over the Darien Gap. Mules swallowed latex-wrapped pellets, boarded commercial flights, prayed the packages didn't burst. Money came back the same way, stuffed in tire wells, hidden in frozen fish, wired through Panamanian shells. Escobar spent $30,000 a month on rubber bands alone to bundle the cash. Power followed money like a shadow. Escobar's motto, plata o plomo, silver or lead, wasn't a slogan. It was policy. A judge who refused a bribe got a coffin delivered to his doorstep. A cop who looked too hard found his kid's school route mapped on his windshield. Entire police stations took payroll. Politicians? Easier. Escobar bought seats in Congress in 1982, strolling the halls in Guayabera shirts, immunity pinned to his lapel. When Minister of Justice Rodrigo Lara Bonilla stripped that immunity and denounced him on national TV in 1984, Escobar answered with a car bomb outside the ministry. Lara dead. The message clear. The Medellin cartel wasn't one man. It was a consortium, a murderous co-op. The Ochoas smoothed edges. Leda dreamed big. Jose Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha. El Mexicano handled enforcement with ranchero brutality. They flooded the U.S. with product. Prices crashing from 100,000 a kilo in 1980 to 20,000 by 85. Miami became a war zone, shootouts in shopping malls, bodies in Cadillacs. The DEA scrambled, but the cartel had eyes everywhere. Then came Cali, 300 kilometers south, a city of pharmacies and soccer fields. The Rodriguez Orejuela brothers, Gilberto the chess player, Miguel the mechanic, built differently. No bombs, no headlines. They owned the drugstore chain that laundered cash, the soccer team that bought goodwill, the radio stations that shaped opinion. Their partner Helmer Pacho Herrera ran New York distribution like a franchise. Jose Santa Cruz Londoño pioneered Europe. Cali infiltrated, not intimidated. Phone taps on the entire city, courtesy of bribed telecom workers. A journalist sniffing too close got a call. "We know your daughter's bus leaves at 7:15. No threat needed. Their labs were surgical clean rooms in suburban basements, chemists in lab coats, product hidden in concrete posts, dissolved in furniture varnish, packed inside frozen broccoli sculpted to look real. Money washed through Bogota banks, Miami real estate, Spanish resorts. By the early 90s, Cali controlled 80% of the world market, quiet as a heartbeat. The violence escalated into theater. Escobar bombed Avianca Flight 203 inches, 1989, to kill a presidential candidate who wasn't even aboard 107 dead. He truck-bombed the DAS security headquarters. 63 killed, 500 wounded. Colombia became a narco state in all but name. Curfews in Bogota, tanks on Medellin streets. The U.S. poured in Black Hawks and agents. Escobar countered with teenage sicarios paid $500 a hit. JITF South seized £100,000 last year alone, per DHS reports. But production hits record highs. The old labs are gone, but the blueprint endures industrial scale, global reach, terror as HR policy. Escobar fell on a Medellin rooftop in 1993, riddled with bullets after a phone call traced by U.S. Tech. Cali's gentlemen surrendered in luxury prisons by 95, but the throne didn't stay empty. The vacuum pulled north, to Mexico's sun-baked deserts, where new kings waited with sharper knives. What happens when the factory moves next door? The Hydra grew new heads. The kitchen was a war zone of Pyrex and baking soda, the air thick with the acrid pop of water boiling off. In a South Bronx apartment, winter of 1984, a dealer named Freeway Rick Ross, fresh off a tennis scholarship, gone sour, watched the mixture cool into pale yellow rocks that cracked like popcorn. He didn't know he was birthing a revolution. He just knew the math. A gram of powder cost $100 on the street, but cooked with soda and water, it stretched into 20 rocks at $5 each. The high hit in 7 seconds flat, a freight train of dopamine that slammed the brain and vanished just as fast, leaving users clawing for the next hit. Crack was cheap, smokable, and engineered for addiction like a slot machine in a casino. The fire had a new fuel. Word spread faster than the smoke. From L.A.'s Compton corners to Harlem stoops, the rocks appeared in glass vials, matchboxes, even hollowed-out cigars. Users didn't need needles or mirrors, just a pipe, a lighter, and desperation. The rush was biblical. Heart exploding, colors sharpening, God whispering your name. Then the crash paranoia, teeth chattering, the world collapsing into grey. 5 minutes of heaven, 5 hours of hell. People sold wedding rings, car stereos, their own bodies for another rock. Mothers left babies in bathtubs while chasing the pipe. Grandmothers pawned heirlooms. The phrase crack house entered the lexicon. Abandoned row homes with boarded windows, mattresses on floors, strangers coupling in shadows for a hit. Violence followed like a plague. Turf wars turned playgrounds into shooting galleries. In D.C., Raphael Edmund III ran a crew that moved 300 kilos a week. His soldiers kids in Nike Cortez, patrolling blocks with Uzi submachine guns. Drive-bys became routine. Stray bullets claimed toddlers. In Miami, the cocaine cowboys escalated to rocket launchers. Homicides in New York doubled between 85 and 90. The media feasted. Nightly news showed skeletal mothers, hollow-eyed teens, babies born trembling. Crack babies became the boogeyman predicted to be a lost generation of brain-damaged zombies. Science later softened the blow. Prenatal cocaine exposure caused issues, but poverty and neglect did the heavier damage. Politicians smelled blood and votes. Ronald Reagan declared drugs public enemy number one. Nancy whispered, "Just say no," on TV. Congress, in a pre-election panic, passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 in a single week. No hearings, no debate. The law's crown jewel, 100-to-1 sentencing disparity. 5 grams of crack, 2 sugar packets, triggered a 5-year mandatory minimum. 500 grams of powder got the same. Crack was the street drug of the poor and black. Powder the party favor of the white and wealthy. The ratio wasn't science, it was politics. A kid with a vial faced more time than a banker with a brick. Prisons swelled. The federal inmate population tripled in a decade. Black men, 1 in 3 born in the 80s, cycled through the system. Families shattered, fathers gone for a decade over a rock the size of a dime. Private prisons lobbied for longer sentences. The school-to-prison pipeline became a conveyor belt. Abroad, the war went literal. Plan Colombia pumped billions into helicopters and herbicides. Glyphosate rained from sky cranes over the Andes, killing coca but also yucca, bananas, rivers. Farmers, already poor, watched crops wither and joined the cartels for survival. Black Hawks ferried Colombian troops to jungle labs. DEA agents in flak jackets kicked doors. Kingpins became trophies. Escobar's rooftop death in '93. Cali's surrender in '95. Washington celebrated, mission accomplished. But victory was a mirage. The cartels didn't die. They franchised. Colombian labs shrank, but Mexican roots widened. The war created the perfect storm for the next monster. DEA reports show overdose deaths dipping slightly from fentanyl peaks, but crack's legacy lingers in sentencing reform fights and community scars. The fire never went out, it just changed color. And north of the border, a new dynasty was sharpening its claws. The border was never just a line on a map. It was a living vein, pulsing with smugglers who knew every arroyo, every coyote trail, every corruptible guard post from Tijuana to Brownsville. For decades, these were family operations, Sinaloa clans hauling tequila one way, appliances the other, until the Colombians arrived, with duffel bags of cash and a proposition. Move our product north, we pay in dollars. The Mexicans started as mules, earning a flat fee per kilo, slipped past the checkpoints. But a former judicial police officer named Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo saw the bigger picture. Nicknamed El Padrino the Godfather, he unified the squabbling plazas into the Guadalajara Cartel, a federation that controlled every major crossing like toll booths on a superhighway. Felix Gallardo wasn't a screamer. He was a negotiator in pressed suits, sipping cognac while mapping routes on napkins. He bought silence the way others buy groceries. A governor's mansion here, a DEA informant there. His breakthrough came when the Colombians, squeezed by U.S. heat, switched payment from cash to product 50% of every load. Suddenly the Mexicans weren't couriers, they were owners with inventory. They built stash houses in El Paso warehouses, distribution cells in Chicago barrios, and a fleet of tractor trailers with hidden compartments welded by moonlight. The House of Cards collapsed in 1985 when DEA agent Enrique Kiki Camarena was kidnapped in Guadalajara, tortured for 30 hours, his screams recorded on cassette. The tape leaked. Outrage exploded. Felix Gallardo was arrested in '89, but the cartel didn't die, it splintered into Hydra heads, each hungrier than the last. Tijuana fell to the Arellano Felix brothers, 7 siblings raised on ranch violence. They ran the plaza like a medieval fiefdom, throwing bodies off bridges with cartel calling cards pinned to tongues. Juarez went to Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the Lord of the Skies, who owned a fleet of Boeing 727 seconds gutted for cargo. He flew direct from Colombia, landing on clandestine strips carved from Chihuahua Desert. Sinaloa birthed the most enduring beast, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, a short farmer's son with a 6th-grade education and a talent for tunnels. Chapo started digging under the border in the 80s, crude crawl spaces at first, then air-conditioned marvels with rail carts, lighting, and ventilation. One ran 900 meters from a warehouse in Agua Prieta to a safe house in Douglas, Arizona, complete with hydraulic doors. The Mexicans' professionalized terror. Los Zetas began as the Gulf Cartel's enforcers deserters from Mexico's elite Gafe unit, trained at Fort Bragg. They brought military precision, encrypted radios, night vision goggles, coordinated ambushes. A Zeta recruitment pitch. We offer more than the army, better pay, better guns, and you get to choose your enemies. They diversified into extortion, kidnapping, oil theft, turning plazas into fiefdoms where mayors paid protection or vanished. Money flowed south in rivers $20 to $40 billion a year, dwarfing tourism. Cartels bought banks, soccer teams, avocado farms. They became the shadow economy, paving roads in forgotten villages, handing out Christmas toys stamped with cartel logos. In Michoacán, La Familia Michoacana preached evangelical Christianity while beheading rivals and dumping heads on disco floors. The Knights Templar followed, mandating moral codes for members: no rape, no stealing from the poor, while running meth super labs that glowed blue under satellite imagery. The violence peaked in a symphony of horrors. Mass graves in Tamaulipas held hundreds. Narco tanks rolled through Culiacan pickup trucks, armored with steel plates and .50 caliber mounts. In 2010, the Zetas blockaded Monterrey with burning buses, paralyzing a metropolis of 4 million. President Felipe Calderón deployed the army in 2006. The cartels responded with car bombs and public hangings. Over 200,000 dead by 2020. Cities like Juarez, crowned murder capital of the world. Chapo's legend grew with every escape. Captured in '93, he bribed his way out of Puente Grande in 2001, hidden in a laundry cart, guards waving goodbye. Recaptured in 14, he tunneled out of Altiplano in 15, a mile-long shaft with motorcycle tracks, emerging in a half-built house. The DEA hunted him with drones and wiretaps. He countered with burner phones and plastic surgery rumors. The Hydra thrives. Sinaloa and CJNG battle for fentanyl routes, pressing pills in Sinaloa warehouses stamped with counterfeit Oxy logos. UNODC estimates 450,000 opioid deaths tied to Mexican supply chains since 2000. The border wall? Cartels laugh, drones fly over, tunnels snake under, catapults hurl bales across. The Colombians taught scale. The Mexicans perfected proximity. The beast didn't die, it crossed the river and made itself at home. And from Mexico's ports, the White River forked east, toward a continent that thought itself immune. Europe was waiting, wallets open, borders porous. What happens when the machine goes global? The web was about to span oceans. The Atlantic is a wide, indifferent highway, and by the late 1990s the Colombians had learned to treat it like one. Motherships, rusty freighters, flying flags of convenience, left Cartagena or Barranquilla, loaded with frozen shrimp or plantains, their holds secretly packed with vacuum-sealed bricks. Out past the 12-mile limit, they met smaller go-fast boats that darted in from the African coast, engines screaming like hornets. The transfer happened in international waters, bales tossed overboard in waterproof drums, GPS beacons blinking, then hauled aboard the African vessels under starlight. No radar, no questions. The powder vanished into the continent's veins, and Europe woke up to a new morning habit. West Africa became the perfect layover lounge. Guinea-Bissau, a sliver of mangroves and coups, earned the nickname the first narco state when a president's son allegedly used the presidential palace as a warehouse. Soldiers moonlighted as dockhands. Fishermen ferried loads up rivers in pirogues carved from single trees. Ghana's Tema port saw containers labeled ceramic tiles that, when cracked open, spilled pure white. Nigeria's Lagos markets sold it alongside yams and knockoff Gucci. The region's chaos was the draw. Borders drawn by colonial pens, governments too broke to patrol, youth armies eager for dollars. A kilo landed for 3,000, flipped in Rotterdam for 50. The Italians greeted the influx like old friends returning from vacation. The 'Ndrangheta Calabria's clan-based octopus had been moving heroin and hash for generations. Cocaine was just diversification. They owned the port of Gioia Tauro, a concrete maze where 10,000 containers arrived daily. A single box stuffed inside hollowed lumber or dissolved in wine barrels vanished among the avalanche. Dockworkers on payroll waved it through. Customs dogs sniffed the wrong crates. From Gioia Tauro, trucks rolled north on the A3 autobahn, drivers sipping espresso, product hidden in tire wells or fake bellies of pregnant mannequins. Antwerp and Rotterdam followed suit. The Belgian diamond capital's port handled more containers than anywhere in Europe. A rip-on, rip-off crew could swap seals in minutes. Dutch-Moroccan networks, the Mokra Mafia, fought for control with Kalashnikovs and grenades, turning quiet suburbs into Beirut flashbacks. A lawyer in Amsterdam found his dog's head on the doorstep. A journalist in Rotterdam watched his car explode outside a cafe. The violence was surgical, not theatrical, no bodies on dance floors, just quiet disappearances that kept the supply chain humming. Albanian clans muscled in from the Balkans, hardened by Kosovo's wars. They ran overland routes through the Schengen zone, no borders, no stops. Trucks left Albania, loaded with olive oil, crossed Montenegro, Serbia, Hungary, Austria, and arrived in Munich warehouses before breakfast. Serbian crews in Belgrade nightclubs cut the product with lidocaine, pressed it into logo-stamped bags, and fed Scandinavia's insatiable appetite. Prices in Oslo hit €200 a gram, pure profit. The ingenuity was breathtaking. Semi-submersibles, fiberglass cigars with snorkel engines crawled the seabed from Venezuela to Galicia, surfacing in fishing villages at 3 a.m. Drones buzzed over the Strait of Gibraltar, dropping duffels onto Spanish beaches. Sailboats raced in the Ark Rally from the Canaries to St. Lucia, crews tanning on deck while keels sagged with hidden ballast. One yacht arrived in Southampton with a false waterline. Customs pried open the bilge to find 2 tons welded inside. Africa's role evolved from transit to production. Colombian chemists flew into Mali, set up labs in abandoned gold mines, taught locals to refine paste with battery acid and cement mixers. Nigerian syndicates in Sao Paulo coordinated with Lebanese fixers in Dubai, routing through Beirut's free trade zone. The powder circled the globe like a virus, mutating with every hop. Europe's demand was voracious. London bankers snorted lines in Canary Wharf toilets before billion-pound trades. Berlin techno-temples pulsed until Monday, patrons chasing the drop with bumps in the dark. Ibiza's superclubs imported DJs and drugs in equal measure. The EU Drug Agency's 2025 report clocks cocaine purity at record highs, seizures at 30-year peaks, yet availability untouched. The continent that prided itself on regulation had become the world's largest consumer per capita. In 2025, the web tightens. West African juntas fund coups with coke cash. European ports report record interceptions, but admit most slips through. The Hydra didn't just cross the ocean, it built new heads in foreign soil. And in hidden labs from Sinaloa to Shenzhen, a synthetic ghost was stirring, ready to ride the White River into every vein. What happens when the poison evolves? The final betrayal was chemical. The first fentanyl-laced gram arrived in a Cleveland suburb like a wolf in sheep's clothing. No fanfare, no warning label. Just a casual bump at a house party that dropped a 23-year-old accountant face-first into his carpet. Coroners scratched their heads. Classic cocaine tox. But the lungs screamed opioid shutdown. By 2015, the anomaly had a name, and the name was everywhere. Fentanyl wasn't grown in jungles or cooked in kitchen pots. It was born in sterile Chinese factories, precursor chemicals shipped in drums labeled industrial solvent, then pressed into counterfeit pills by Sinaloa chemists wearing hazmat suits. 50 times heroin's punch, 100 times morphine's. 2 grains could flatline an elephant. Cartels loved the margins. A kilo of fentanyl cost $4,000 to synthesize. stretched into 1 million street doses, worth 50 million. The White River turned toxic overnight. Users never saw it coming. A weekend warrior in Denver buys premium coke from a festival dealer, snorts a line, feels the familiar rocket, then his knees buckle, breath rattles out like a dying engine. Narcan revives him if a friend acts fast. Too often, no one does. The CDC's 2025 tally, over 110,000 overdose deaths, 70% involving synthetics, cocaine, a vector in 30%. Party drugs became Russian roulette. Every mirror held a potential coffin nail. The labs evolved into sci-fi horrors. In Culiacan cul-de-sacs, workers in bunny suits tablet fentanyl with binders, stamp M30 for OxyContin fakes, or mix powder cuts at 1% enough to hook, not always kill. Shipments cross entire treads, drone swarms, even mailed in birthday cards. Border seizures hit record tons, but the DEA admits 90% slips through. Chinese suppliers pivot to new precursors faster than bans print. One factory raid in Wuhan yields enough for 10 million doses. The human ledger is brutal. A nurse in Philadelphia loses her son to a coke binge that was 98% fentanyl. A high school quarterback in rural Ohio pops a blue pill for pre-game confidence, wakes in a morgue drawer. Communities fracture. Trust evaporates when every dealer is a potential executioner. Rehab beds overflow. Narcan kits sell out at pharmacies. First responders carry body bags as standard gear. Environmentally, the legacy scars deeper. Amazon deforestation accelerates coca fields clear 2 hectares for every ton produced, slash and burn, releasing carbon that rivals Brazil's cattle ranches. Chemical dumps poison rivers. Sulfuric acid, kerosene, lime sludge, turning tributaries into dead zones, where fish float belly up and children drink toxins that stunt growth. Indigenous tribes in the Putumayo lose hunting grounds to armed labs. Wayu women in Colombia's Guajira weave baskets from plastic waste washed downstream. Corruption metastasizes. Mexican governors vacation on cartel yachts. African presidents fly private jets fueled by transit fees. In Guinea-Bissau, coup leaders stockpile coke cash for AKs. Europe's ports bribe unions. US border agents flip for 6 figures. The powder dissolves institutions like acid on metal. Yet the machine adapts. Blockchain launders billions. Dark web marketplaces rate dealers like Uber. Crypto wallets in the Caymans hold more narco wealth than some nations' GDPs. Violence mutates. CJ&G hangs bodies from overpasses with narco banners. Sinaloa floods Chicago with fentanyl-laced heroin, hooking a new generation. In 2025, Reuters reports global coca cultivation at all-time highs. Washington Center warns cartel funds armed terrorists from Hezbollah to African militias. The leaf that once soothed Andean laborers now bankrolls chaos from Kabul to Kinshasa. The ultimate deception. Users fund their own destruction. Every dollar snorted in a Manhattan loft or a Manchester pub echoes down the chain, paying the campesino's pittance, the sicario's bullet, the chemist's bonus. The pyramid stands, base of exploited farmers, middle of disposable mules and hitmen, apex of oblivious consumers chasing a ghost high. Reform flickers, Portugal decriminalizes, Oregon experiments, but the Hydra laughs. Fentanyl's descendants loom, nitazines, xylazine, zombie drugs that rot flesh from the inside. The powders promise power, escape, connection delivers only ruin, renewed with every generation. As the sun sets on this blood and powder saga, one truth endures. Desire outlives prohibition, chemistry outpaces law, and the leaf's whisper still calls from the mountains. Will we ever silence it? And there we stand, at the edge of this long, winding trail through blood and powder, the air still heavy with the scent of distant jungles and chemical ghosts. We've chased the leaf from those thin Andean heights, where it was a humble companion to weary souls, all the way to the sterile labs, where its essence twisted into something unrecognizable, a synthetic killer hiding in plain sight. What began as a sacrament for survival morphed into a tool of empires, a medical marvel, a forbidden thrill, and now, in 2025, a silent epidemic claiming lives in record numbers. The numbers from the UN this year don't lie. Production soaring, routes multiplying, overdoses climbing despite every raid and reform. It's a story that refuses to end, echoing in emergency rooms, empty playgrounds, and boardrooms alike. Think back for a moment to that first chew in the Inca dawn, the leaf-dulling altitude's bite and fueling a civilization's heartbeat. The Spanish saw opportunity in the pain, turning divine gift into colonial chain. European chemists unlocked the crystal. Freud dreamed of cures. Entrepreneurs bottled euphoria. The fall came swift paranoia in parlors, myths in headlines, laws that pushed it underground. The 20s glamorized it. Cartels industrialized it. Crack democratized the despair. Mexico inherited the throne. Fentanyl sharpened the blade. Europe and Africa became way stations in a global web that spans oceans and defies borders. And through it all, the human cost. Scarred rainforests, bleeding toxins, nations hollowed by corruption, families shattered by a 5-minute rush. The deception is masterful. Cocaine promised elevation, sharper minds, endless energy, unbreakable confidence. It delivered chains. Addiction's grip, violence's cycle, society's blind spots, racial fears, weaponized laws, class-divided powder from rock. Farmers in the Putumayo toil for pennies while boardroom bonuses flow from the same stream. Sicarios bury rivals in mass graves. Users chase ghosts in bathroom stalls. The pyramid endures, built on desire and denial. Yet in this darkness, flickers of light persist. Communities rebuild with Narcan in every glove box. Sentencing reforms chip at disparities. Decriminalization experiments in Portugal show paths beyond punishment. Indigenous groups reclaim coca for tradition, not trade. Scientists hunt blockers for fentanyl's kiss of death, but the beast adapts faster than we evolve. New synthetics brew in hidden corners, roots shift like sand dunes. As Mr. H, your guide through these midnight histories on Mystery History for Sleep, I leave you with this. The powder's legacy isn't just in the graves or the seized tons it's in us, in the choices we make when temptation whispers. If tonight's journey stirred something in you, a curiosity for the shadows or a resolve against them, share it below. Tell me where you're listening from, what time your clock shows, or what hidden history you'd chase next. Like the video if the tale kept you company. Subscribe to Mystery History for Sleep for more dives into the unknown. I'm Mr. H, always here with another story to ease you into dreams. Hit that bell so the next episode finds you without fail. Your support keeps these whispers alive. Now, let the weight settle. Phone down, lights low, the world outside fading. The leaf story loops eternal, but tonight, let it carry you to rest. Breathe deep, release the day's chains, and drift into the quiet where mysteries dissolve. Good night, friends. Sleep well in the arms of the unknown.